All right. Hey, Tim.
Hey, Danny.
Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah. No, you've got an interesting story, and we're going to get into it. I know you've told me that you bought a house for $250. So I can't wait to find out how that happened and what that was like. I'm sure it was in pristine condition, right?
Yeah, that was about 70,000 to bring it back to life.
Oh man, 70 grand. All right. So let's start with your story. What got you interested in house flipping, and take us from getting started to where you are now?
I've always been interested in housing. You don't always quite understand it, but I've always wanted to do that. Growing up, my family worked on houses. Dad had rental properties, and so the family working together, we go to the house. We would all have our different jobs, working on siding, framing, flooring, that kind of thing. And so when it started out, I have an older brother, and so he was like Dad's right hand. And so my job usually ended up being something like taking nails out of 2x4s and repurposing whatever materials we could. And then I have a younger sister who works with me today. Her job is like going and getting Dad a glass of tea. So it's always been kind of a family business, but also more of a hobby. We had 5 to 10 rentals growing up that Dad worked on, and we kind of helped him with that. You find the old house in the neighborhood that's just has been sitting empty, that everybody thinks is haunted, and we know today those are the ones that are the great opportunity.
Yeah.
But back in the 80s and 90s when we were doing this, that's the house you stayed away from.
Yeah.
So that's how we got our start, and we helped out. It was just family bonding time. You drive around neighborhoods. We were always going for a drive, and the kids were just sitting in the back seat and just taking it all in while Mom and Dad are pointing at the different houses and talking about different things. And so as we got started, we didn't do it. We didn't get paid. We weren't doing it for money, but like at the end of a project, we'd get a new bike or a new scooter or something like that. So, and then
is that the same
Dad
market?
was renting those properties out. I just
same
remember standing at the kitchen table as he's seated there with all of his rent money, and he's counting it out at the end of the month and said, "Oh, this has got all the rent collected." And I'm just standing at the edge of the table, like wide-eyed, like looking at the money, and like you just want to touch it, get back. We weren't allowed to touch it, and so I wonder if that was part of my drive to see it and it be within reach, but not allowed to touch it as well.
We should do that more as investors, though. Is have the proceeds from a sale come back to us in cash, because I think we would appreciate it a lot more than just having it wired to account. Because that, like you said, this is a ton of money a lot of times, and to see
Absolutely.
it as cash would make it real, like seem like it really was, instead of just something that numbers being passed back and forth.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, at least roll around in the money at least once, right?
Yeah, like Scrooge McDuck. Absolutely, yeah. So it was great just seeing him count it out. And as a kid, to us, $5 was a lot of money, and to see him, checking his amounts, it was a good driver. And so I always had that in the back of my mind that real estate was going to be our thing. And growing up, then I ended up going into the military and kind of went away, but it was always in the back of my mind. And so the first house that I bought on my own, I was in Southern California and house hacked a condo that was next to the military base. And basically with the housing allowance, I lived there for free.
Wow.
That would have been about 2002. And so at the time I bought the place, it was a great investment. It was a small condo, Southern California, for about $160,000. And in the 2 years that I lived there, it had raised up to a value of $260,000. So $100,000 profit potentially. And so about that time, I'm transitioning out of the military, and the price started dropping down. So when I listed it, not really knowing what I was doing it, but figuring out as I went, kept trying to maximize the price I could get instead of just taking what could be a healthy profit and moving on, chasing the market as the market went down, and eventually wasn't able to sell it and just rented it out for about 10 years and just sold that at the end of last year.
How did you make out when you finally sold it?
All said and done, at the end of each year, with depreciation, I probably just about broke even. When we finally sold at the end of last year, made about 20,000 off it.
Yeah, not bad.
In the end, it was just nice to get out of it in the black and to not have to deal with that property in Southern California anymore.
Yeah, isn't it crazy to think how much the values went up back then? You know, skyrocketed through the roof.
Yeah. What I bought a small bedroom condo in California back then, you could get 3-bed, 2-bath house in a great neighborhood here in small town Iowa.
Yeah. Yeah. So were you originally from Iowa? Is that where your parents were buying property, like rental properties? So are you where you grew up?
I am Burlington, Iowa, born and raised. Left here just after high school. Did 10 years in the military. Ended up down south in Mississippi for school. I'm sorry?
I said thanks for your service, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Left the military, went back to school, traveled around a little bit after I graduated from college with a business degree. Ended up back in California, this time in San Francisco, working for a small company out there that specialized in government projects. We started out doing janitorial service, green cleaning, waste management. But I was spending a lot of time in airports and traveling. And so I did that for about 2 years. And then I was ready to come back to Iowa.
Yeah. So what was your start in the real estate part of that when you came back?
And so I'd say my deep dive into real estate would have been in 2000, where I came back and I started my first house. At that time, you can get, that house was a 3-bed, 1-bath house. Bought it. It was listed for $10,000. Bought it for $9,000, and I did all the work myself. And that was a great learning process. Yeah. I can remember in this attic space that was reclaimed, it had wallpaper. And I was taking this wallpaper off with a razor blade knife. And what would really take somebody half a day, the razor blades were chipping, and you really got to think about how much value is, like, it wasn't worth my time.
Right.
But when I was first getting started, you don't always realize where your energy is best spent.
Yeah,
so
I was there
at the time coming back to Iowa. That was my only job, working at this house, and so I just was doing it all on my own, painting, and at the same time looking for people to add to the team who's going to help me out in some of this rehab. So worked on that house was probably about 6 months, but first house, that first year we just did the one house, but learned so much. And so then the next year I was able to double and almost triple, the amount of work that you're doing. But it was because I figured out you got to add more people. I was living at this house basically 20 hours a day doing these very minor tasks that you could pay somebody $10 an hour to do, and I could be looking for the next deal.
So when you say add people, what did you mean? Adding like a contracting crew or subcontractors? Who are you adding, and how did you find those people?
Adding other contractors to at least help me out. So if I was going to, at that point, run the contracting on my own, I needed at least a couple other handymen to help me out. And so when that first started, as I reached out, it immediately started with my sister, Jeannie, who we grew up doing that together. And she had 2 small kids at the time. They're much older now. But at the time, she needed the flexibility to be able to come and go. And so coming in to help me out, gave her the extra money that she needed. And as that became more of a thing, because her background was culinary. So at the time, she still wanted to pursue more culinary options, but needed flexibility with twin daughters to be able to get away when she needed to. So, and then from there, just reaching out, I'd go by Lowe's, go by the other local hardware stores in the morning, trying to find contractors. go to gas stations and just sit outside gas stations in the mornings while contractors coming in to pick up breakfast, and just take a picture of the different decals on the side of the vehicles and
Wow, that's
call
good.
them.
Yeah.
And
That's a
just
good
kind of like networking, just making that phone call to see who you can talk to.
What were you doing at Home Depot? Were you looking at vehicles also, or were you actually talking to them as they were coming and going in and out of the store?
A little bit of both. Sometimes going there, I got so focused on the task that was immediately in front of me, like I need to get supplies to finish this part of the job, that I just be so focused on that one thing that I wasn't thinking as much about having that conversation. Like I need to get back to keep this thing moving. And
Oh yeah.
really, that was the wrong idea. You needed to talk to these professionals, and but I didn't have the idea about cost at that time either. So I just got in knowing that real estate's what we wanted to do. And at this point, my parents, they weren't doing their rentals as much. So when us kids left home, that kind of, became something that they didn't want to take on by themselves. And so as far as costs go, all that had changed. So here I am figuring out costs all over again. And, from doing research on the internet and podcasts and figuring out, okay, this is about what cost should be for square foot of flooring or painting, and how to figure those things out. And then reaching out to some of these contractors, where I remember talking to a tile guy who came in and said, well, this is the room. And he said, yeah, it'll be, about, I can't remember now, but, $7, $8, $10 a square foot. And I knew there's no way. And that wasn't materials included, so
Wow.
but you talk to sometimes contractors who they don't necessarily need the work just yet, and to make it worth their while, they're going to charge a higher price. And as you get in and you network with other investors, and the heating and air guy that I use, been using him forever, great guy. And so talking to him, he knows good contractors, and sometimes they don't want to necessarily put a name out there in case something goes bad. And so it's saying, hey, nothing against you. I'm just looking for a name. If it doesn't work out, I just appreciate you giving me the name. And if it doesn't work out, that's on me. But
Yeah.
at least a point in the right direction.
Yeah, it is quite a bit of talking to a lot of different people to find the right ones that you use, for a long time, if you build that good relationship. So it's worth that effort in the beginning to find some real good contractors, and build that relationship, because you can end up working. We've got some people that we've been working with for over 12, 13 years. And they weren't found immediately, but
one tip I had is, I'd heard on a podcast before, you go to your Lowe's or Home Depot, and you go there at a certain time, you find a good contractor. And so I also flipped that. And I wouldn't recommend this for everybody, but at the end of the workday, after you've had this hard manual day of labor and it's hot out and you just want to take a break, what do people do? You go to the bar. And so I was also going by the bars and finding those same signs. And as long as you're comfortable with your interview process, you can still get a good contractor there. That, it's just relaxing at the end of the day. You just got to make sure that that's what they're doing at the right time. And if you go there at noon, you're probably not getting a good one.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the time of day, I guess, right?
But we've tried everything. Another option that we had here locally is there's a halfway house where you can go there and just pick up some guys for spot work for the day. Or if you have a long-term project and you want to hire somebody for the long term, where these guys, again, they come with their own issues. Sometimes they know what they're doing on a certain task. Or if you're doing a trash out, no problem, nothing specialized there. But if you're doing some finishing work, maybe you want to stick to something else. But
yeah. Well, great. So I want to talk a lot more about the fact that you're in a small market, because I don't recall really having much conversation with people about small markets on the podcast.
Okay.
And find out sort of, the challenges that have come with being in a smaller market. You said about 100,000 people in the Tri-County area, I think is what you had said. What are some of the challenges that you've faced with that?
the challenge of finding people, they don't always want to work at certain times of the years. It gets cold out. You have more people that are looking to hole up for the winter. And so finding a pool of labor is what's difficult. So sometimes you overlook things to get the right people involved, you know, where you, like I mentioned, working with some people from the halfway house, you know, in other markets, you're like, I don't want to deal with anything like that. You know, like some of the issues that could come up, but to me, I've never had any issues. It's more the scare factor, but you've got to find the labor somewhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have a manufacturing community here. There's different, there's an ordnance plant, there's your Siemens, General Electric. And so there's more people coming in that are just going straight to the factories and finding the labor that you need. We talked to 4 guys last week about coming in, and this is just handyman type stuff, and coming in to help out with painting. And then I worried, geez, did I just get too many people signed on for this job? Come the next week when they were supposed to start, none of those 4 showed up.
Oh, wow.
So then the issue is, well, for me, it's always, well, I can do that. And so do I jump in and start doing the painting, or that's not growing the business? And so that's been my biggest struggle is you can jump in and do that task, but what really needs to happen to make this business grow isn't going to happen if I keep jumping in and bridging that gap.
Yeah, so finding that crew. I mean, you've got projects going end to end, right? When they finish a project, you have another project already waiting, or do you have gaps in between projects?
At this point, we actually have multiple projects running at once. So in addition to our flips, we have our rentals, which we manage in-house. So that could be the gap filler in itself, and that's how it was originally set up. But at this point, we have 3 flips that we're running at each time. And so we're kind of bouncing around. It works so that we have the plumbers and electricians and the mechanicals, they can be working on one flip while my crew is doing drywall and painting at another flip. And just trying to keep things lined up because people are depending on us for a paycheck. And so if I don't have something lined up, work for them to do, then they're going to go to something that's more consistent. And so early on, we did have that issue where the very first flip we did, I started out doing rentals. We always had rentals, and that's kind of how we got our feet wet. And I think that's a great way to start for this market, because I could buy a rental property for, you know, $10,000 and maybe put another $10,000, $15,000 into it. And for a 3-bed, 1-bath house, rents for $700, $750. And so it wasn't until after that that I got into the flips. And in starting into the flips, I worked with a bigger flipping company out in Northern Virginia, and they were flipping 300 houses a year. And
wow.
Going out and working with them for 6 months, I learned more about their processes of you start, you know, with A and you slowly work your way to C instead of bouncing around. You know, we're doing this bedroom and that bedroom and then the kitchen. You know, you do all of your electric at once, all of your plumbing at once. And so that was really helpful for me. And so coming back from Northern Virginia, that's when we did our first flip. And so I got in, we did our first flip, and while we were waiting for that to close, we didn't have anything else to move into next. And so we tell the crews, hey, take some time off. And that's not the answer for them when they've got their own bills to pay.
Yeah. And I was asking about the end-to-end because that typically is a good way to find some contractors willing to give you good rates if they don't have to go and find more work all the time.
Right.
You know, it's a little bit more loyalty for you, and, you know, it's a good relationship to have that way. So that's with contractors. Have you had trouble with, you know, finding enough properties, you know, deals to do being in a smaller market?
We've always managed to find the properties. That's something I feel is my strong suit because that's what I really enjoy. Driving for dollars, I'll go to different neighborhoods that we want to invest in, and that's where I'll run that day. Just run, get a feel for the neighborhood. I worked for the post office for 2 years, and that was excellent. I learned about so many houses and the history of those houses. And when I worked for the post office, I was a temporary carrier. So I just filled gaps. I didn't have one particular route assigned to me. And so I learned the whole city. Well, today I might be on the northern side of town, and then the next day I'm on the south side of town. And as I'm walking down these streets delivering the mail, I see the houses that are vacant, and I just write that address down and come back and look up the history, see who has it, and send them a yellow letter. And I've gotten several properties that way. So very intimate with the inner workings of the city, knowing all the streets, side streets that growing up here, I had no idea that that street ever existed. But now that I had a purpose to be there, delivering the mail, now I learned about it, where there may only be 2 or 3 houses on that street, but you drive right by it and you don't even realize that it's tucked in there.
That's always a part of this business that I was really fascinated by when we first got started, was going to these parts of town that we had never been to, and seeing these areas that you didn't even know existed. And even after have lived in the city for 20 years, didn't know, existed. It was really interesting to me. It was kind of cool to go and be around like places that you usually have no other reason to drive through.
Absolutely. And the neighbors they wanted to talk more when they see you in postal uniform. You say, hey, what's going on with that house next door? It looks like nobody's lived there forever. And they say, oh, somebody lives there. They just, don't come out, or they moved away about 6 months ago. They moved in with their children up in some other city, and it gives you a little bit of credibility where they don't mind just sharing as much with you. So,
yeah, that's good. That's a good tactic, and a lot of insights into the type of properties that end up being vacant too. I mean, walking is always different than driving, right? You see so much more when you're walking. So you haven't had trouble getting properties. So how are you getting properties in the smaller market? What are the driving for dollars method of driving around looking for vacant rundown houses? But what else are you doing to get those properties?
Have realtors that we work with that will bring us deals. I actually don't buy much off the MLS, but our market is so small that I can pursue the same houses in different areas where, and people will know that I'm looking at that house. For example, there's one house we're supposed to be closing on next week, is a house I've been trying to get for a couple years now. It's the worst house in this whole neighborhood, and it's so much opportunity to it. But as I've plugged away at this house, it's switched hands from husband to the wife in a divorce, and people know that I've been looking at this house, and then they gave me a call and said, hey, I know who has that house now, and you get a number and call them up. So I let people know that I buy houses. And so when something comes up, I'll get that phone call. The driving for dollars, I'll send out the yellow letters, sometimes on the MLS. And just recently we started with the website through Lead Propeller.
Awesome.
So getting leads that way.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like, and that was one of the first things I thought about with the smaller market, because my dad actually invested in smaller markets. And, the big thing about him was everybody, well, I think I say everybody, I'm sure not everybody, but a lot of people know that Frank buys houses, in the area that he's in. And it seemed like that's the perfect kind of thing. Like you can find the negatives in being in a small market, but I think there's an awful lot of positives in that it's a little bit easier to get word out about the fact that you buy houses. You can brand and really stand out and be the person people think about, because there's not a lot of noise of a bunch of other competing people doing the same thing. I mean, I'm sure you have competitors. What's your competition like?
I think there's a lot of competition here, but for Iowa, the competition is everybody wants to do a house or two. So they may only do one house a year, but are they going to pay more for that house than I can flipping full time? So there's a lot of smaller players, and so it spreads out over more people.
So do you think that people around there know about you in particular? I know you said you get the call sometimes because you let people know that you buy houses. Do you feel like you have that, a little bit of that reputation already for being, where a lot more people know about it and the word kind of spreads?
I would say more for my network. Different people that I've worked with over the years, they like to hear what I'm up to. And so when somebody they know is getting ready to sell a house, they'll give me a call. Different realtors will give me a call. But to meet somebody that I haven't already touched physically yet, a little bit harder. I put my signs out, advertise with the website, and the yards. I don't put out the bandit signs. I just put them in the yards of different properties that we're working on. And if I get a call from those signs, it's usually somebody wanting to rent the house, not somebody buying or wanting to sell. But the different contractors I work with, somebody always knows somebody that's getting ready to sell a house. And so the different investors in town, they may be passing on a deal and ready to say, hey, this one might work for you. So that way, but just in general, for the public, I've had a hard time reaching people because the signs and the marketing that I've done, not quite there.
Yeah. Have you tried billboards, or are there many billboards around town, around the area? Because I wonder if that's a good way to really quickly, brand yourself in a market like that.
It could be. We do have some billboards as you come into town, but around town, not so much. But we have these small communities, and so leaving one community, coming into the next, there's the billboards. You see a lot of the roofers here are big with the bandit signs. And so I know the bandit signs could work, but nobody here is putting out bandit signs.
Yeah.
I put them in the yards, and that's about it. And I don't know if we have ordinance against it. But it's funny to see the roofers, the way they get competitive, where one roofer will put their sign out on a corner, and then another roofer will come by and surround that person's sign with their own signs. So it's comical to watch. Because we used to put out bandit signs when I was in Northern Virginia, and there it was competitive as well. And you get these different strategies to get your sign that much higher. And I remember carrying a ladder around with me. And so when you see somebody else's sign, I would go ahead and put my sign up, has my phone number, and then I would cut the number off of their sign. So it's just a fun thing to do. And we all laughed about it. And investors, just having a good time, I guess.
Yeah. So do you think that there's, how are you marketing your business? Are you using a business name that you're sort of branding, or? I
am. My marketing has really been low. Word of mouth mainly. I've got the website now that we put out there. I've got business cards that we pass out, and I talk to different people. And but advertising locally, just on the signs that we put in the houses that we're working on, but we haven't done any billboards or anything like that. It's more been small. Yeah.
So it's more about Tim Steele than a business name.
Well, our flipping name is House and Home Properties, and so we put that out there, and that's our website. And for the signs we put in the yards, we actually don't even have the name on there. We buy houses, and here's the number. And so that could be something that I need to critique a little bit more.
Yeah. But I remember Steve Cook used to, when I was following him on the Flipping Homes blogs a long time ago, he would always, on the properties, I think it was him, he'd put those banners on the property. He'd get a 10-foot banner or whatever, a vinyl banner, and put it across the front of the property. And that really stand out. People really look at that. It's the whole "We Buy Houses" kind of thing on it.
Absolutely. We have one of those.
Oh, do you? Does it work pretty good? You get quite a few calls or people asking about it?
the neighbors will come and ask about it, but the calls we get are usually people that are trying to say, hey, is this house going to be for rent?
Yeah.
Uh, so I think little bit of it comes with more people in this area are more comfortable with realtors. I've got a neighborhood that we're working in now, that we're working on one of the flips, and I've got this big, I think it's a 4x8 banner hung up on this really nice front porch. And then I've also got a yard sign in the yard as well, because it's kind of a wider front yard. And we had just flipped a house in this neighborhood that we closed on 2 weeks ago, a month ago. And a house just came up that this lady was just interested in getting rid of the house. She hasn't been living there, and now it's become a nuisance issue. And so I have all these signs around her house, but I still find out about this house through one of the local realtors. So she had to have passed by my signs, but never thought to call the number.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if that's a small town disconnect where people, I feel sometimes in our market, just naturally people keep to themselves. And so they're not going to reach out to something like that. And
Yeah, they're going to contact
reach
somebody
out to a realtor that you worked with in the past.
Right. Yeah, or a friend told you about some realtor they know, or a relative that's a realtor, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I could see that. But obviously marketing the fact that you buy houses doesn't hurt, and you get the people that don't want to have somebody they know look at their embarrassing situation, to sell some of these houses sometimes.
Yeah. And it could be I'm on the right path and I just need to keep doing more of it, because the marketing that we're doing, that's been growing over the last year, 2 years. So when I first got started, we're doing 1 house to 3 houses. I didn't even think about it more of a business. It's more of, I enjoy doing this. How about an extra income? And so from there, it's kind of grown into, well, this is what I want to do because of the flexibility that it gives me.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell me about that house you bought for $250? How did that happen?
So I've never heard anybody talk about this, but one thing that happens here is when a house is just left and it's been neglected and it's got to meet certain criteria, but an abandoned house, the city will take possession of that house. And they've got a process that they go through, and it goes through the courts. But so the city will take these houses that have, all intents and purposes, have just been abandoned. And so this house was one of those houses. And when these houses come up, the city will, at a city council meeting, will hold an auction, similar to every other auction that you see. And but it's this small little niche that you've got to know about the house, and you've got to go to this city council meeting, and you just bid on the house. And so to walk through the house, I've got a great relationship with the code inspectors here. Sometimes you hear some really horrible stories about code inspectors in different cities. And here, I think they all just want the same. We just want to have a nice city, get rid of some of these rundown houses. And I was working for the post office at the time, and I wasn't getting off work until after 6 o'clock. And I talked to the inspector, and I wanted to walk through the house, and he said, I'll just meet you there when you get off work. And so he's been off work for hours, and it came in his off time to meet with me. We walked through the house, and I said, well, definitely interested in it. It's a lot of work. And he said, it is a lot of work. And they actually had it under contract to be tore down. And so that was going to affect his budget. And so, he was interested in just covering his costs in the transaction, where the minimum bid for one of these houses is $500 is where it starts. And this is a big house. It was 2,600 square feet that had been converted into a triplex. Part of the stipulation in purchasing this house is it had to be converted back to a single family home, but it was in horrible shape. There's a big hole in the roof. It was water damage inside, had to redo the floor joists, all the mechanicals, the wiring had been stripped, top to bottom, needed to be completely redone. And so they thought, well, we'll just tear it down and And then I come along. And for me, it was a great project because $250 covered all their court costs to file the paperwork. So they are happy. Now they don't transfer deed until it's livable, because they don't want to just kick the can down the road. If you're not going to fix the house up, then they're going to take it back. So you have a certain time frame that you've got to get started, and you've got to have it livable within a year or two. And they work with you. It's just they want to make sure that you are making progress.
Yeah.
And so that's how we got that one, $250, and nobody else had bid on it. And so I was the only one crazy enough for that. But
yeah, that's awesome though. I mean, $250. So you said 70,000 for the fix up. How long did it take you to fix up, and what did you end up doing with it?
Well, to start out, the outside of the house was stucco, which isn't conducive to our area, the way it snows here, but you still see a few of those houses every now and again. So we had a little bit of patchwork to do, paint the house, put a new roof on, and we just tried to get the shell of it done as quickly as possible. And then for the inside, it was such a big project. It was a major renovation that really our team wasn't ready for at the time. With 3 and 4 of us doing this job, we were kind of bouncing around to some of our easier projects. And then we had this one on our plate that we knew we always had work to do. And so it wasn't a push to get it done, because the only cost we had involved in this place was the original $250 and then the fix up as you go. And so it was a great project for us to learn as we go, trying to figure out some of these different things. And and to find the right contractors. And I still use this contractor today, the electrician. As we rewired this house, and I had this great idea that I was going to put in baseboard heat. And he said, "No, I don't think you want to do that. Baseboard heat, it's not very efficient." And I said, no, I've done my research. And he still likes it. I've done my research. This is cost efficient. And he said, "Well, okay." He tried to tell me not to do it, and it just turned out that he didn't want to get into an argument with me, so he just let me go down the wrong path. And I think it was 2-3 years later, we ended up going back in because the heating costs were way too much, and we still put a whole HVAC system in. And he loves to throw it in my face now that I told you. And sometimes you think and somebody else that's been around, they just know better. And but for this house, we had to put new roof, HVAC system, electric, plumbing. We had to completely gut it and start over, try to even out the floors. But the house was just a great opportunity for us to learn as we went and try to figure out some of these tasks that weren't in our wheelhouse, and to find the right people, the plumbers, the electricians, the trades that do the things that we can't do here. And
awesome. So what's the white whale? You had mentioned something about a white whale. It's investors have one house. You want to explain that white whale? So
there's a house that I would just love to rehab. It's just down the street from me, and I drive by it every day, and I see what this house could be. It's I don't think anyone's lived in it for 10, 15, 20 years. It's got vagrants over time that have tore things up, and the neighbors call and say, "Hey, we got to get these people out," and sheriff shows up, and the yard just looks horrible. But it could be the most beautiful house you've seen. And so I'd love to fix up this house. And so doing my research, I found the lady that owns it, and I've reached out to her multiple times, and most of the time she doesn't answer. And so I'll send another letter or another postcard, and just being consistent. And then I'll see where there's a nuisance tag from the city. And so I'll reach out to her again and say, "Hey, I see the city has tagged your property as a nuisance. I could take care of that for you." And nothing. Well, I decided to have just a little bit of fun with it. And I'm always thinking about this house, and I may never get it, and that's fine. But went on a trip to the coast of Mississippi. My brother got married, and while I was down there, I'm still thinking about this house. And so I got this postcard, and I sent her a postcard that said, hey, I'm in Mississippi, but still thinking about buying your house. And sent her the postcard. And then from that, she did text me back and said, hey, just not interested in selling. And so, just trying to do something different. For our market, we can be so targeted with our yellow letters. So, I try to just do something a little bit different to maybe, get a reaction. My wife and I went down and we stood in front of the house and took a selfie. And I printed out another yellow letter and printed out this selfie picture and included in there and sent it to her, and no response. But
yeah. So do you think that's something? Is that a house that you guys want to live in personally, or is that an investment property you want to pick up?
Well, it could be both. It's not one that we'd move into personally, but sometimes I think those make the best investments. If it's a property that you wouldn't mind being in, then how many other people wouldn't mind being in that property? And so, right. So I would definitely love to live there, but not to move from where I am now.
Yeah. When we were looking for an old house that needed work, tend to put a little bit more effort into trying to contact the owner, and that was always fun for us. And we did end up buying a house that was built in 1910, I think.
Yeah.
And that one took a long time to fix up. But yeah, I mean, it was worth it. It was really cool to have that experience and do that.
And I don't think my wife would ever want to live in a house that we're working on. She's seen some of the things that I've done to the house that I live in now. Before we got married, and she saw the before pictures, and as I make the transition into the different rooms and update things, and it's all complete now, but like drywall, that dust gets everywhere, and try as hard as you will, like it just gets through all the cracks. I put furnace filters on floor fans to try to suck up the dust and all this little things, and she's just seen it in pictures, and she's like, oh, that's awful. And I said, it's worse to live in. But so I did that, and I wouldn't want to do it again. I don't think no live-in flips for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. And is there anything that you want to share with the audience and anybody out there listening before we end the interview? Good book recommendation or anything like that?
Yeah, I read a ton. And so listening to the different podcasts, I'm always searching for another book to read. And what I'll do is I'll write it down on a hit list, and then I'll go to the library. And most of the time they don't even have the book. And so I'll request it from another library, because I always like to read it first. And after I read it, if that's a book that I want to hang on to, then I'll go and buy it. And so I do got a couple here. Of course, you got Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And so I don't want to keep pulling out the same books. And so I got a couple recommendations that you don't hear all the time. And one of them is called List More, Sell More by Terry Brooker. And so one of the big things he talks about in that book is, from a realtor standpoint, is dealing with the for sale by owners, and how you can, speak with the for sale by owner and eventually maybe get that as a property that you're able to list. But as a investor, it's the same thing for us. If I can go in and talk to that person and say, this is what I can offer you in buying your house. And it's a great mindset book when it comes to purchasing.
Yeah, thanks.
And then I got one more that I really enjoy that I had never heard, is How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big by Scott Adams, who is the creator of Dilbert. And so one thing he says in that book is goals are for losers, which I think is for shock value. But his reason for saying that is it's more about establishing the consistency to create a pattern for yourself where you're doing this same task every day to change that. Instead of saying, my goal is I want to lose 10 pounds. Because his argument is, say you lose 10 pounds. Before you got there, you spent your whole time in this negative mindset that you're not good enough until you lose that 10 pounds. And so now you lose that weight, and for that brief moment, you feel good. Everything is exactly how you want it to be. But then what happens? You set this new goal of, I want to be something else. And so you're back to that negative mindset. And so for him, instead of setting a goal, create a process. And so maybe that process is, I want to go to the gym 5 days a week. And so the pressure is just to create that habit that you're exercising and not necessarily to lose weight. And so
I like that a lot. Yeah.
Excellent book, very funny, lighthearted. So he talks about some of the things that he's been through and how setting up his processes have been more important than goals.
Excellent. No, I love that. That's a great idea. And I like that perspective, right, of the whole negative, mindset, for having that goal and going there instead of setting up the thing that would actually get you there, but then to keep doing it and build the habit out of it. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for being on the show.
Thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah, and if anybody out there listening wants to get a hold of you, is there any way that they can find you and get a hold of you?
The best way is through our website, houseandhomeproperties.com. That's through Lead Propeller, and at the bottom of the web page, we have the links to Twitter. We try to use the Twitter for just putting out information that we found in the industry. We've got Instagram where we post some of our pictures. We use Pinterest where we go for our ideas.
And that's
LinkedIn,
all under House and Home? That's all under House and Home?
Also, all under House and Home Properties.
House and Home Properties. Awesome. All right. So you guys know how to find Tim, and be sure to find him on one of the social media channels and thank him for being on the podcast episode and sharing his valuable wisdom. All right. Well, that's it. Thank you so much, Tim, and keep in touch.
All right. Will do. Thank you, Danny.
Yep.
All right. Bye.